watching HRTV, and my guest for today is David Meier. David Meier is an expert in lean management, in lean processes, and the founder and the president of a consulting company which is called Lean Associates.
Yes,
is it correct?
That's correct.
David, my first question, you had a beautiful presentation today for the Czech People Management Forum that was, in my point of view, aimed at how to teach people, or how should people in their processes learn how to do things more effectively with less costs, and how to contribute more to the company profits, and just to make things more easily. Is it correct?
Yeah, I would say that's a good understanding. I think maybe one slight difference to what you said is profit. We were taught at Toyota that profit is an outcome of those things, but not necessarily the goal. And if people are developed and if people learn and grow, then the company grows and prospers. And they taught us that it's like a triangle with the employees and the company and the community, and that together those things grow and prosper.
You spent a considerable time of your life with Toyota.
Yes.
What was the first thing when you just started to comprehend the process that struck you, that was just completely out of this earth, and it was just the biggest surprise for you?
Wow, that's a great question. That it was confusing. The learning at Toyota was confusing from the very first day, really. I joined the company, and within 2 weeks we were in Japan, and for me it was the first time being really out of the United States and really a different culture. And my trainer, I had a trainer with me, a Japanese guy, and we went to the plant and we stopped at a workstation, and he said to me, "You looking okay?" And I thought, yes, what is it I'm supposed to look for? What am I supposed to see, And we went back and forth. He said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, what? What am I looking for?" And he said, "Yes, looking." I said, well, what am I looking for? He said, "What?" I said, "What am I looking for?" So we had a little language challenge. And finally, after maybe 10 minutes or so, I decided that looking wasn't difficult, that I could certainly look. So I stood and watched the work for a while, and I noticed he disappeared. He was gone, and so I thought, well, maybe he went to the bathroom or smoke or something, and so after about 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, I thought to myself, well, I've seen this guy do his job over and over again, and I understand what he's doing, so I'm finished. Yeah, but my trainer, he's not back yet. So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally 2 hours goes by, and he comes back. And first I asked him, where'd you go? You just left me here. And he didn't understand the English, so I realized this is going to be a interesting process here with this company. And he asked me, what C? Right, in those words, what C? And I said, well, I can see this guy, he's doing these things and so on, and I explained. And he said, okay, more looking. And I said, again, okay, what is it I'm supposed to see, What am I looking for? He said, what? I said, yeah, what am I looking for? He said, yes, looking. I said, oh my God. So literally the next, and then he disappeared again. Okay, leave me here in the middle of this place. And for the next 2 hours, he was gone for 2 hours again. For the next 2 hours, I'm thinking to myself things like, what did I get into here? Can I get my old job back? Can I find my way home? I don't even know where I am. They drove me to this place. There's nobody here who speaks English. You know, what am I going to do? My back is hurting. My legs are tired. I'm standing here for 4 hours. They don't tell me what I'm supposed to do. So he comes back and he asks me again, you know, what's C? I said, look, I told you last time, right, that this is what's happening here. And so on. He says, more looking. Well, by this time, okay, I've been standing here for 4 hours just watching one guy do his job. And something in me decided that apparently I need to see something. I have no idea what, and he wasn't explaining it to me. But maybe I'll start making some notes, and maybe I'll start seeing other details. So I'm documenting these things, you know, and writing these things down. And finally, he comes back again after 2 hours, and he asks me the question, you know, what's C? I said, well, now, let me show you, right? And I start explaining all these things, and he says, very good, very good, very good. And of course, I'm thinking that I'm finally gonna get away from this place to do something. I finish, and he says, more looking. And I thought, this is crazy. I came here to learn something. I came here to be taught some jobs and how to build a car or how to do these things. And yet I stand here all day, and I don't know why. Right? I don't understand why. So at the end of the day, I met with my other colleagues from America, and we're discussing, and they're all saying, "What did you do today?" "Oh, I stood there all day." "Me too." What were they trying? Why did we do that? I don't know. I have no idea. We were all confused. Everyone was confused. But I learned the next day that some guys had to stand for 2 days because apparently they didn't learn that what they were trying to teach us, which I didn't understand till later, was how to really look deeply at something. One of the lessons they taught us is how to develop a deep understanding, right? And I've done this exercise myself 100 times since leaving Toyota with other people and other companies in all countries. And everybody does the same thing as I did. They look for a few minutes and they say, okay, I understand. We don't take the time to really deeply understand. And that was the first lesson. I could go on for the rest of the day on other lessons that didn't make any sense. But I realized later, if he had told me what I should look for, what would I find? Right? What would I learn? I would learn nothing. And the point wasn't to see exactly a certain thing. The point was to learn how to look at things more carefully. Long answer for a short question, but it was a great question.
But it well corresponds with what I was in a similar situation just described when I was watching for a presentation, because I came a little bit late. I didn't know what you're talking about. I just had to pay attention to the details of your presentation, of the details what you're trying to say, because I just missed the beginning.
Right.
And what I noticed is that it was just the statements that I saw were just very, very understandable, short, easy to understand. But they were just composed of little details that you were mentioning. And one of the details that I noticed was that there was a good example. You were speaking about what you think. You drive a car to your office, and you just wake up and you realize that you're standing in the parking lot, and you don't have a clue what was happening because you were playing some movie in your mind, and you just You are driving subconsciously, and is it something what you do with your clients, that you come to a process that people just do automatically, they do it subconsciously, and they maybe don't have this vision above themselves, and they don't realize the small details, which some of them can be done more effectively, maybe in a short amount of time. Is it something that you do in your consulting work?
Yes, actually, because as human beings, our ways of looking at things and thinking about things and so forth has really allowed us to survive as a species for thousands of years. And the way our brains function have served a purpose. Unfortunately, as the world advances and things advance, like we're talking at this conference, our brains don't advance as quickly. We don't evolve as quickly as the technology, and we have very specific patterns in our thinking. They're very well studied and they're very well understood by sociologists. And so this notion of understanding something is, and the trouble with that, and what I was saying in that example, is that once we know something, once we know how to do it, and they call it muscle memory, but it's not memory in your muscles, it's in your brain, but it's literally, if you think about comparison to your computer on the hard drive, it's like you have to go into that file to pull that information back out, right? Whereas when you're learning something new, you're actively thinking about it. You're thinking. So language is a great example. I'm here in Czech Republic, and if I want to say something, it's not automatic for me. I have to think about what's the word I'm supposed to say. In my case right now, my brain is going between German and Russian, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm not in Germany or Russia, but I was, but my brain hasn't switched because it's not an automatic thing. I don't have enough of the language skill to make it automatic. So I'm thinking, oh, what do I say? How do I say it? What's the correct word? Used to happen often when I was at Toyota because Japanese and Spanish Spanish language has some similar structure into vowel sounds and things. So I had learned Spanish in school. So then I'm learning Japanese. So sometimes I would look at the Japanese guys and say something in Spanish. And they would look at me confused, like,
just came up automatically.
Yeah, because my brain was more used to Spanish than it was Japanese. So when I speak Japanese, I have to stop and think, what am I actually saying? But when you learn a language, when you're fluent in a language or skill in anything, then it's a different function in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Let's imagine a situation where you have a new client who invites you to solve a very complex process that the company has been doing for years, maybe for tens of years, and your goal is to make it more lean, if you want, or more effective, but the company has already done anything they could have done to be as effective as possible. What is the first thing you do? Do you just do what you just described? You just then in front of the process and you just look, or what is the first thing?
Well, the first thing is there's not always a first thing that's the same. The unfortunate answer is it depends, and it depends on the situation. But there's sort of a specific thought process or thinking process that we would go through, and that's one of the things I was trying to talk about here is how do you know a thinking process, right? For example, around lean, I've done it for 30 years, so I know what I know, but I don't always know how I know it, right? Because a lot of the things we learned at Toyota were experiential, like standing there and looking all day. They never came back and said, here was the point of the lesson, right? You had to figure out the point of the lesson. You had to understand what it was that was being taught, because there was no lesson that was physically taught, right? You experienced it. And so with experiential learning, it's a different process. So I do with my clients similar to what was done with me. First, let's just look at it. No writing, no talking, no asking questions, just observation. Okay? Then Toyota gives us some tools, some physical tools that we can use to be able to look differently. So I was talking to the translator in there, and I was explaining that one of the things that bothers me is people say to think outside the box, right? Or work smarter, not harder. The two phrases you hear often. And I always think to myself, well, if I knew how to think out of the box, I'd already be out of the box. But the reason I'm in the box is because I don't have a different way to think. So you have to teach me a different way to think so that I can be out of the box. Right? So that's what Toyota does, is they give you some tools or some concepts, some philosophies, and they talk about things like flow, okay? And they don't talk about it in specific terms like an assembly line or building cars. They talk about it, and they use the metaphor of a stream running through the woods. And you want it to be peaceful, and you want it to be gentle without turbulence and without stoppage and without all this, right? And so then imagine that idea in the work you do. So for you, it would be the flow of a conversation, right? There's the flow here. Plato said actually that everything flows. So that idea has been around for a long time. But to take that idea, which is what it is, it's a mental concept, and then to think about how does that apply to this process or task that I'm doing here. And it can be applied anywhere because it's a mental concept. It's not a physical thing. They don't say, here's how you build a car. That's a different thing, right? So the ideas are applicable. So then I teach people the tools on how to look at it a certain way, and then they see the issue. They see what needs to be done. I don't have to tell them how to fix their process. They know how. They just haven't been taught a different way to think about it. And you can't do anything different until you learn a different way to think. That's the basic idea.
What you just mentioned is the learning process. You have the human capital or the human sources, and sometimes there's a person who has been working on the similar or on the same process for years. How can you and how
the old dog?
Yes. How can you teach the old dog to do the new things, to think out of the box, to see the things in a different perspective, and just to make it a habit, because he needs to get into the flow process anyway, in order to make it more effective.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So actually, a similar question came up with my translator today. She made the statement, I don't like change. Well, I've heard it 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times perhaps. It's one of the most common statements. I don't like change, or often people don't say that, they say they don't like change, right? Of course, I accept change.
But interest usually is.
Yeah, of course. They don't want to change, right? How do you teach this old dog, the old timers, they don't want to do something different, blah, blah, blah. And I say, okay, look, I explained to you, you have to go a little bit further into the question, right? Let's go back again to the human brain, because that's where everything starts. All of behavior is an outcome of thinking. So everything starts with thinking. First I think, then I behave, then I act, right? So what's the thinking? Or it's not thinking, what's actually happening in the brain? And what happens in the brain, and science can prove all of this now, it's very, very straightforward, is that when we learn things, language, driving, our route to work, our familiar places, our brains like to make neural connections, right? And they like to make those patterns because our brains are designed to conserve energy, okay? Our brain is 5% of our body mass, but uses 20% of our physical energy. So it's a huge, inefficient machine, right? And over the millennia, our brains have developed methods to conserve energy. Because up until 200 years ago, food wasn't readily available, and if you weren't able to conserve energy, you were going to die, right? So it's not an issue today, but it was 200 years ago, and for thousands of years prior to that.
Because there's a question of speed. If you see some animal
Exactly.
attack, you don't have much time.
If you don't have any energy left, or you don't think fast, you're dead.
You're eaten, you're gone.
You're gone. So the brain is this amazing thing that's conserving energy by following patterns. And the longer we follow a pattern, the stronger it's like a path in the woods. So whether it's a task, it's a language, it's the phone I use, the longer I do something, the stronger that path becomes, and the less likely it is to change, and the more painful it is to change. It's difficult every time we have to learn something new. I get a new car, I get a new cell phone, I get something, and it doesn't work the same as the other one did, and now I have to learn. And my brain is saying, oh no, that's too much work, that's too much work. I don't want to work that hard, you see? So that's what we're up against. So how do you deal with that? Well, I believe it's not quite the same. I believe that it's not that people don't like change. It's that people don't like change imposed on them. I don't want you to tell me I have to change. But if I accept this thing, I'll do whatever it takes. See, I've seen 80-year-old people on their cell phone just like they're 6 years old, right? Using their smartphone and searching the internet and stuff. And I said, well, if it were true old people don't want to learn anything new, how can this be?
I remember John Glenn being in space. He was almost 80 years old.
Yeah.
He was the first person in the ballistic in the 60s, and then he sent into the space again when he was almost 80 years old, and he had proved perfectly to be fine with the other guys who were 40 years
That's right.
younger than he was.
Yeah. So I've seen situations where the very newest employee was stubborn, and I've seen situations where the person who'd been there 30 years was quite open. So I think it varies according to what it is. And the thing I try to teach managers is don't go and tell people what's wrong and what they need to do to fix it. Go and tell them what you're trying to achieve and ask them what they think. You see, if I ask you for an idea, you're more likely to give it. And if you have it, if you have the idea, you're more likely to use it.
Because I would think it's my idea and yours.
It's simple. It is your idea. Now, on that note, a lot of managers talk to me on the side a little quietly, and they say, you know, if I can make them think that my idea was theirs, you know, then they'll do it. And I said, well, that's called manipulation. And it's not the same, right? I'm not talking about getting people to accept my idea, because I'm not. I'm trying to show people a different way to think about things and to look at things, and then let them decide. We have a goal, we have an objective to achieve, but there's many different ways to get there. Okay, there's not just one single path. So I had to learn for myself. I don't care necessarily what the path is, as long as we arrive at the destination on time. I can't allow it to take forever. We have to get certain place in a certain time. But how we get there, the people who do the work can create the way. Right?
Back to the first question. You spent a lot of time with Toyota learning their Toyota way, their lean processes. But what about the argument which you may hear a lot of times, or you may have heard a lot of times, what about different countries, different cultures? Because the Japanese are very specific in the way they approach their jobs, and their culture is very aimed to be very efficient because they are an island, and on an island there are a lot of people living on an island that they must be efficient. But what about if you come to a completely different country with completely different culture? Is it the path and the principles are the same, or do you have to think out of the box when you come to a different country?
Well, you know, I can't think out of the box unless I learn something new. You know, when I first started to work with other companies in other countries, and even in the beginning it was just in the United States, and I could see these same kind of patterns of thinking happening over and over and over again. And at that time, within the United States, the language was something like, hold on, Dave, I don't think you understand how it is at our company. Our company is different. Or I don't think you understand how it is in California versus Kentucky, because we're different. Or, you know, and I kept hearing this over and over and over again. Or we don't build cars. You see, that might work where you build cars, but we're different. And then I started working with car companies, and they couldn't say, we don't build cars. So they said, we're not Japanese. And I said, you know, here's the interesting thing. When you join Toyota, if a manager joins Toyota in Japan, the first thing they have to do is read Henry Ford's book. Today and Tomorrow is the title for Henry Ford's book, written in 1926, I think it was. Okay? That's the first assignment they have. What I learned over the years is, and they give credit to Ford and others, is many of the things that they learned from Henry Ford's original thinking. And it wasn't specifically Japanese or Japanese culture.
They're the fundamentals.
They're fundamental. They're ways of thinking about things that have little to do with culture. It is true, or it was true, I think it's probably changed a bit, that Japanese people as a culture tended to be more homogenous, aligned in their thinking and their behaviors, as you said, because it's an island, and they have certain sayings like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, you know, so that people are more similar in their way. But when they came to the United States, the first lessons to us were, we're not trying to make you Japanese. And this isn't about being Japanese. This is about the Toyota way of doing things. And if you look at other Japanese automakers, for example, or other Japanese manufacturers, they have similar methodologies because they all learned them together after World War II from the same sources, which, by the way, were from America, USA.
Drucker, for example.
Drucker, Deming, you know, TWI, all of these methodologies brought in there, and these companies were all there learning them simultaneously, okay? Now they've applied them in different ways, but there's a similarity, but it has nothing to do with being Japanese. It has to do with they learned at the same school, right? So their patterns of thinking about those things are similar. And I found this out just not too many years ago when I went back to Japan for another company, not Toyota, not automotive. They were in, they manufactured products for healthcare, right? Medical. And I asked this group of Japanese people, I said, so tell me what you understand about this word Kaizen. Because at Toyota we use this word Kaizen all the time, right? And it was translated originally to mean continuous improvement. So I asked these guys, thinking that I would get the same answer. Oh, that's continuous improvement. They hemmed and hawed, and they had some discussion in Japanese for a minute, and then finally one guy said, you know, let me go home and ask my wife because we're not really sure. I thought, well, that's really odd because, I mean, this is a word we use at Toyota every day, over and over and over, just Kaizen, Kaizen, Kaizen. So he came back the next day and he said, first of all, he said, Kaizen is typically something you do at work. It's not something you do in your personal relationships or something. It's related to work. And Kaizen can only be done on something that already exists. So the creation of something is not Kaizen. The improvement or the literal translation, I think, means to improve for the better or to make for the better. And so that, to me, that was kind of enlightening to realize that, okay, you can't improve something that doesn't already exist. That's creation. And then from there, back to something you said earlier, is literally there is no perfection, so that process would go on forever, right? The challenge is the closer you get to theoretical perfection, the harder it gets to get better, right? The law of diminishing returns takes effect, and the gains become incrementally smaller and the effort becomes incrementally greater, right? So half the benefit for twice the work, for example. And so that's really the big key at Toyota, is teaching people to think better, to think more effectively, to be more efficient in the thinking process, and how to solve the more difficult problems that are going to give a smaller gain, but to use less effort. That's the key to long-term success.
David, my last question is, all you've just said is, for at least for the managers, it's the issue that comes on my mind is a question, or is an issue that's very close to a big issue, which is the motivation. How can you motivate people to really think in these Kaizen terms, to really be motivated to put their best and to try to things in little small steps and make things, at least in their mind, just to think in the way to make it more effective, to just play with the idea, to be out of the box, but just on the day-to-day level. How can the managers motivate people or keep the level of motivation that will assure that the people will really think about this Kaizen process, even though they don't know what the Kaizen means?
Well, first of all, I don't think I really answered your previous question completely. I realized once I started traveling out of the United States, what I saw was the same thinking, the same objections, if you will, I was getting other places, only the wording was different. Oh, you don't understand German people or Polish people or Hungarian people or Czech people or Russian people or Chinese people, or been in all these countries, and I hear the same thing every time. Oh, it's different here. Czech people won't do this, or Czech people are this way, or they're not going to, and I just have to roll my eyes sometimes and think, wow, I've never heard that before, and so that leads to your second question about motivation, and I'll say this is my opinion, that it is impossible to motivate someone else. Okay? I can't motivate you. I can't motivate someone else. I can only provide an environment where you will be motivated. Okay? The question I asked in the group in here is the question I always ask in groups, or where there might be leaders who make the objection, you don't understand my people, or my culture, or my company, or something. And I asked the questions. I said, how many of you in this audience want to go to work and to do something meaningful, do something that makes a difference, do something that has a purpose? Right? Everybody raises their hand. How many of you want to be engaged in something meaningful, that matters, that's interesting, or whatever? Everybody raises their hand. So I've asked that question to thousands of people, and everybody raises their hand. So I'm not a statistician, but I would have to conclude that if thousands out of thousands say yes, that the percentage is 99%. Deming, if I can remember quoting exactly, I believe he said 95% of the people want to go to work every day and do a good job. So I also asked that question. How many of you want to do a good job? How many of you, sometimes I turn the question around too, how many of you want to go to work and screw up?
Just waste your time.
Yeah, waste your time, do meaningless, mundane, routine work that doesn't matter, fill out forms that nobody ever looks at. How many of you want to do that? And of course, nobody. Every now and then somebody try to be joking, says, oh, I love doing meaningless stuff. And so I said, look, here's the only conclusion I can draw from that then. I'm not an expert in this, but I can put two and two together and say that if 99.9% of the people want those things to be engaged, to be relevant, to matter somehow, and numerous studies point the same thing out, right? If that's the case, that must be normal human behavior. That must be the way we are automatically. And so if you're telling me you're getting this behavior instead of that one, and this is normal, yours is abnormal. So in order to get abnormal behavior, you have to do something on purpose.
So it's more a question of changing the environment and changing the...
You're creating that situation. This is normal. This is the way people are going to behave if they're given the right situation. This is the way they're behaving given the current situation. So what is it? What is it that causes it? And I can tell you it's easy. What causes it is your attitude, which creates your behavior. So I can tell you in every country, in every culture, in every place I've been, I've had leaders tell me two different things, basically. I'll put it in two simple categories. I've had leaders who say, we've got some really great people here. They do great things. It's amazing, the work they do. I'm really proud of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then in this case over here, this is so-and-so country or so-and-so region, and the labor pool isn't so great, and our pay level isn't so great, and so we don't really attract great people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Excuse. And I just think, well, of course you get that result because that's your attitude, right? There's not ever going to be a situation where 100% of the people are perfect and great and absolutely wonderful. Even at the Olympics, in the race of the finest athletes in the world, one guy wins and one guy comes in last, but they're all great. They're different. They're not going to be exactly the same. So to me, it always comes back to one simple thing. It's your attitude about it, and whether you truly want it or not. And if you don't want it, you're going to tell me all the reasons it can't happen. I was at a company once, some years back, and I was in with all the top-level leadership, the CEOs and all the top-level leadership of this company. And one by one, they went around the room and basically explained all the challenges and all the reasons it wouldn't work, and the people in this country were a certain way, and they would never give anything extra, and all these ideas just couldn't happen here. Couldn't happen.
And did it happen?
Well, so it came around the end, and the CEO asked me a very difficult question. He said, "Can you tell me what's the main difference between us and Toyota?" And sometimes I'm stumped a little bit. I said, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to say? What's the number one difference?" And then it occurred to me, and I said, "Well, I can tell you easily." I said, "I worked at Toyota for 10 years. Okay, not one single time during that 10 years did I have one of the Japanese guys tell me that something was impossible. Not one single time. They would say it's difficult. They would talk about challenges. And they would talk about the issues that were needing to be addressed, but they never, ever said something couldn't be done."
once you say that, you just close the door, in your mind at least.
I said, now I've been here for about an hour and a half, and I said, every single one of you only told me exactly why it couldn't happen here. I said, that's the difference, right? It's all in your attitude about it. Of course it's difficult. Toyota never, in the 10 years I was there, they never said, hey, what we do is easy. They said every day, it's difficult, it's a challenge. They didn't make any apologies for that. They didn't say life at Toyota is easy. They said life at Toyota is hard. It's hard to be great. It's hard to solve problems. It's hard to get better every day. They never apologized for that. Right? They had high expectations. The level of performance needed to be high. But the interesting thing, and this is the difference, and this took me a long time before I understood it logically, but I guess on an emotional level to understand it, that if you're my subordinate, I have a responsibility for your development. If you fail, I failed. If I give you assignments and you don't succeed, I failed. You didn't fail, I failed. You see, everywhere else the viewpoint is you failed to do your job. But it's exactly the opposite there. And that doesn't mean I'm going to give you simple assignments so you succeed and I succeed. No, they're difficult. They're big challenges. My job is to develop you to be able to succeed. Right? Now that's with the assumption that you have at least basic intelligence and capabilities and so forth, right? And a desire. That's the only thing I tell. I can't give you the desire to want to succeed, motivate. I can't motivate you. I can only provide an environment by which you will be motivated, right? Little difference. So that's
Toyota way.
the Toyota way in a nutshell.
David Meier, it was a great pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure.
Best of luck, and I look forward with our viewers to watch another HRTV guest and wish you best luck.
Great. Thank you.